Hello and welcome to Changemakers Show, where we speak with inspiring and influential changemakers and the people who support them, up close and personal. So get cozy and get ready to listen to our changemakers' stories and advice. Ask your burning questions and get inspired by their impact so you can be and bring the change you wish to see in the world too. Now let's get started with today's show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Changemakers Show. So excited to have Sergio Marrero here with us today.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for being here, and all the way from New York City. And great to have you because we're actually old friends from not quite a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, going back.
Yeah, we took part in the Startup Chile Accelerator or Incubator together. I don't know which term they've landed on now. At that time they didn't really have one or the other, but that space has evolved a lot since we were there, hasn't it?
Yep. Mm-hmm. It has.
And I was remembering this morning that you hosted at our first social innovation weekend, you ran the design thinking prototyping workshop with our participants. So this is so great to have you on the show.
Yep. That was almost about 5-6 years ago. So it's great. It's awesome.
Time flies. And now the thing that has stayed constant since I've known you is definitely your passion for innovation and design thinking and also impact. But you tend to work with startups and also, working on the investment side and really on the cutting edge of a lot of these startup methodologies and best practices for new entrepreneurs, plus this passion for the impact space. So I'd love to dig into that.
Sure.
You do consulting now, and we also want to talk about the new-ish project / podcast, Rebel Method, that you're working on.
Awesome. Yeah, so, thank you.
How would you describe yourself in a nutshell? Because I'm not going to lie, it's a challenge because you have so much talent and experience in these different facets.
Yeah, I say venture designer. I'm a startup coach. A lot of people don't know. They're like, venture designer, what's that? But I think because of my background in business, and that's probably at the forefront. Technical, the engineering, and design. The three of those, I've been really straddling different silos we've created in the professional world to understand how to accelerate entrepreneurs, and that's been the common theme is how do we accelerate early stage entrepreneurs. My passion and interest is accelerating, I say, impact innovation, focusing on the challenges that the world needs to address. That's a personal focus, but regardless of the venture you're creating, or I will meet with an entrepreneur and talk to them, and happy to walk through the process of that very early stage. So I really focus on the early stage, 0 to 1, less industry focused and more focused on that point in time, aspiring entrepreneurs, first time starters, and my long-term goal is focused on creating a pipeline for that early stage impact entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. So, fabulous. And where do you think that passion came from, and that desire to focus on early stage and also the impact piece? Like, where did that seed come from?
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, myself, I'm from I would say a family of creatives. I went to school and I did engineering, but my father is a musician. My sister's a graphic designer. The other one's focused on public policy and also does dance. I was the weird one that went for engineering. So I say I was always the business mind amongst creatives, and I think that has stuck. That's like where it began, and it really continued into my work when I went to grad school. I had, several moments that kind of shaped my journey. But when I went into grad school and did my first startup, actually the startup that went down to Startup Chile, before I did the training down there on rapid prototyping, which I had done before, I had worked on a startup called Plex, and we built a product. Didn't get as much user traction as we anticipated. The product was moving forward, but not at the speed, and there were a number of mistakes in terms of the composition of the team and the amount of money we had, and the what we were actually focused on building, and it fell apart. And from going through that, as painful as it was at the time, I said entrepreneurship is super difficult, but it doesn't have to be. And I think people assume that it needs to be difficult because everyone says it's difficult. And as an engineer, I like focusing on tough problems. So I think since then, I've been working on just really immersing myself and accumulating the expertise and depth in business and in venture and design across industry, so that I can really bring some of that together and help codify it for early stage entrepreneurs. So hopefully to make other early stage entrepreneurs not go through the same process as myself. And also I think in terms of impact innovation, it's harder than just launching any product. And the reason I say that is because impact innovation, you're measuring, I'm not only selling this pen and I need to sell lots of pens. There's another measure of an impact, right? It's like, okay, how many people am I employing, or the difference that I'm making in X lives. Usually an impact entrepreneur, their focus initially is not profit, even though you need profit to survive and thrive. So that I think it's a place that's going to be a model for the way companies will be in the future. This generation is demanding it, and I want to be a part of that. That movement that's accelerating impact innovation.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and it's so true. I love that you say entrepreneurship is really hard because people say it is, or but that it can be solved, or it can be codified to a certain extent, or
absolutely,
the people who've been through it can share back those flags or those benchmarks or those, hey, you're headed this direction, but let's just peek over here because there's something important over here that you need to pay attention to.
Yep.
And so, yeah, to reduce that learning curve, I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And good.
Well, and you've had the experience side too. So not only are you, refining your expertise on all of these methodologies, but you've applied them. You've been in the trenches, so to speak, which, theory is one thing and practice goes a long way too.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I think every entrepreneur is a little bit skeptical, right? They're looking at the world and they're saying like, I think something needs to exist here. And myself, like, that's been the pattern. Is I'll go into the theory and say, okay, like, how is this theory applied, and go to apply it and oscillate back and forth, because I think you need that, the real world prototyping. So that's exactly where I like to be, is like putting the theory to practice and helping people move forward.
Yeah, for sure. And so what was your biggest learning in that process with Plex? I know you said that it kind of didn't go as well as you'd hoped. And in the early stages, especially first venture, obviously it's a crash course in how do all these things fit together. And with all of those crash courses, we as entrepreneurs eventually become, I would hope, a little more streamlined or efficient or aware as we go. I mean, not to say things can't still go wrong down the road, but what was your biggest learning through that process?
Yeah, I think the learning in that I would say, chapter, there were a number of things, simple things from the composition of the team, from the distance you put yourself, closer to the customer, and having teammates close by so you can iterate faster. Really focusing on maximizing the rate of learning. That's a phrase that really comes from one of the lead prototypers that worked at Google X, Tom Chi, and talks about those methodologies. I think personally, that I learned at a higher level is that, and this is something that I couldn't articulate until a long time later, is that succeeding past these different steps is difficult, not because entrepreneurship is complex, but because as an entrepreneur, you have to remember thousands of simple things to do simultaneously. And I think that's the challenge. You have to remember that you should be close to your entrepreneur, close to your customer. Makes total sense. So you can show them what you want to build them. They can say yes or no. And then you can go through that cycle until you discover what they actually want. And it's like, oh, that makes total sense. But then you get money, right, far away from your customer, and you're like, I got to go there, and on the margin, at that point in time, it feels like, oh, you just, at that very point, you're like, I got money, I got to go. Like that makes sense, but you ignore everything else. And I think those are the things you have to balance. I think some of the softer things are other things that really were, that are a continuous challenge. You have to be like super self-aware if someone's challenging you. They say it's focused on really, really maintaining like a clear sense of vision, but at the same time, be objectives and be able to look at yourself and go, okay, does this vision have to move? Because you're telling the world this is the way it's got to be, and then you learn something from your customer, and your customer's like, that's not the way it needs to be. So you need to realign, and you need to be almost humble and curious in that respect, and empathetic. So there were, I can go on and on in terms of a number of things, but learned myself that it is tough as an early stage entrepreneur. And then I think the biggest things that keep you striving are the other community of entrepreneurs, really asking for help, and I think really thinking, like being empathetic, not only to your customer, but to when other people are telling you things, like take a step back and really think about if what they're telling you has weight. I think those are, all different things that I learned. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm so glad you're taking these learnings and helping other new ventures get going, because it's true, there's all these tensions, and Acumen and Acumen talk a lot about in their values, that all their values that they hold are in tension because we're wrestling with opposites a lot. And it's kind of a spectrum of being determined and persevering and being humble and listening to your customer, and when to push and pull on each of these things, which maybe that's kind of the dance that we're learning as entrepreneurs in a way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about funding, because you mentioned that, and how we can, definitely get drawn to different sources of funding. We obviously were in a community where entrepreneurs were gathering in South America because of funding, and it brought lots of great things, and maybe it pulled people in different directions. But the funding in general is a big challenge for startups and new social entrepreneurs. And obviously there's a whole spectrum of how people can access different levels of funding. But I know that you have some thoughts about this. So not sure which piece you want to get into, because we could probably talk all day about that. But what are your general thoughts about?
Absolutely. I think, so I have a very, very specific opinions. And I think every entrepreneur, when they're first starting out, has misconceived notions of funding. They're like, oh, I just need money. And that's not true.
It'll solve everything, right? That's the only thing I need.
Exactly. And there are a number, you have to think of everything you believe as a guess and a hypothesis that you have to test. So let me be more To take a step back, as it relates to funding, that's one of the biggest assumptions when talking to early stage entrepreneurs, or the biggest, I would say, faults. I say are twofold. One, I call it ugly baby, right? Like nobody wants to admit that their baby is ugly. Their startup is is their baby, and it may not exist or work in the world. Like you may develop what you're doing, and your customers may not buy it, and it just doesn't work. It actually doesn't work, and you actually need to put yourself in a place of like remove the entity from yourself. This startup is not you, right? And view it as a separate thing, and saying, okay, my job is not to bring this into the world. My job is to discover what works. And I think that's a shift in thinking. So I think that's like step one. As it relates to funding, everybody assumes all I need is money. And I would agree if what you're building is something that's extremely capital intensive. So let me be more specific. If there's an entrepreneur that has a background in creating nuclear reactors, right, and wants to build, a small nuclear reactor that they can, I'm just making it up. That there's actually an entrepreneur out there like this that's building a nuclear reactor that's not the size of a building, but the size of a bus, and that can power a small area, and and it's mobile, right? You think about that, that's going to take millions of dollars to build the first version of it. Even if you bring it down, you can't make a tiny nuclear reactor.
The MVP
that's
is
a very specific use case. Exactly. The MVP is still going to cost you, hundreds of millions. It's just another magnitude. Okay. That's something where you need to raise capital for, before you're making money. But it doesn't mean that there aren't hypotheses you can test, right? So you can, go out to people you expect to buy it, and you can show them, drawings and mock-ups of what you're doing. You can get them to commit to, they're like, yes, I would buy that if you can build this at this price per watt of energy. And those are all testing the assumptions that you've made, and the major assumptions are, I can build that, they want to buy that, and this is what people actually want. And I think those are the three assumptions that you're rattling with over and over. But everyone jumps to focusing on the assumption, I can build that, and they focus on building right away, when they should really focus on the assumption, do they want to buy that, and will they pay for that? And in the will I pay for that, can I do it profitably? I think that's that's a big question. So yeah, what I would say is, so I think a bunch of entrepreneurs are like, great, I don't need funding, what do I do now? What I would say, and I've had several entrepreneurs, talk to me, and what I tell them is your best funder is your first customer, right? Is like especially if you're in in the US, it's, developed world, and, or very, very, robust ecosystem. I would say focus on your first couple tens of thousands, maybe even your first $100,000 should be from customers, not from funders. And the reason I say that is because your incentives are tightly linked to understanding what they'll pay for. And you're not assuming someone will pay for it eventually. You're actually working on that assumption from day one. And there are ways to break this down always. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you tell me, I want to start a bakery. You don't need to buy a building or buy a cafe and spend all this money outfitting it and put equipment in there. Your smallest unit of testing that assumption is baking a pie or a muffin and selling that to someone. And if they buy that, and you get into the rhythm of doing that, you're testing, can I build that? Will they pay for that? Right? Which is, and then eventually you sell enough that, you got to get your pricing right. You got to charge enough that it covers, your time and the costs. And as you're working through that, hopefully you get to a point where you have, you're increasing the price enough to a point where you're getting profit, and you build up the money to buy your cafe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I use that as an example of, you want to break down your bigger vision into a smaller piece. And that's, that's what you need to do in terms of funding, like your first, there are all these unsaid rules as funders. And I would first focus on your customer as your first funder. And then when you want other money to grow, it will almost come because you have customers, and you've proved to investors that you are actually a real business, and you're thinking about profitability, and you're thinking about customers and serving them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I could talk about this all day, but I'll stop. I'll pause.
No, I think this is so important, and it's interesting because when you're the entrepreneur and you want that bakery, it's so hard to see the path to the smallest way to test those two things about, will people, do people want it, and will they pay for it, and how does my pricing and profitability work? I think often entrepreneurs need to chat with a mentor or a coach or their peers or somebody like that. Takes a lot of teasing through the vision and seeing how you break it down, because so many entrepreneurs have that great vision and want to start with all the things, and they're like, no, I need to build this and that and this and that. So it's quite a challenge sometimes to see that path to the smaller elements that you can build and then start building back up. But yeah, that's the fastest way to get investors interested, right? Is like, hey, I got this thing, it's already working. You want to put fuel on it? Great, let's do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're looking at you, and they're saying, they're investors. So investors are thinking, am I going to give you money and not only get that money back, but get a return over that, right? And if you tell me I have an idea, no customers, and I'm not making any money, my risk that I'm giving you money and you're going to even get there is very high, because you've assumed you can build it, they will pay for it, and I can do this at a profit. And if you can prove out those assumptions, in a minor way, and then an investor is, it's clear. It's the investor sees you and is like, wait a minute, like, can they grow? If I just give them this money, like, they're gonna to buy that shop, right? Then they're gonna get 10x customers. Is that true? And you get another mind in the game, thinking about like, how can you achieve it? Because the point is what I've learned as an entrepreneur, like, you can make anything become real if you have an infinite amount of time, and yes, and an amount of money, and space to do it. But you can just focus on something a long time, and the reality is we have one life, and we can build lots of things, and you really have to decide what is meaningful for you to build while you're here.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great point. That's kind of the bigger limit. The bigger limit, I don't know what word to use there, is that time and that focus. Because you can, if you have that thinking about listening to your customers and prototyping and iterating, you can do that for a long time. But when do you get to the point where it's working, and what else have you given up on along the way potentially?
Yeah, it was definitely. I'll share I guess one of the challenges. I'll probably go a level deeper. Is we were working on, social issue called. It was a startup originally called Alex. We had to change the name because of another company, but called Kayla. And in a nutshell, it delivered like on-demand learning related to your job to help you move forward in your career. So very social mission was like to increase economic mobility, so people can learn what they need to learn without going into $1,000 of debt, and move forward in their jobs. We were building and had a team in Puerto Rico, and a developer and my co-founder, and then I was in the States, talking to different clients. And in the end, we we shifted, right? It's like we wanted schools to buy it. Schools were really slow, so we shifted into human resources. Human resources was willing to spend money on it to train employees that were really high caliber. And I would almost, not the assumption like we all, benefit from continuous training, but not the population I would say I was most passionate about creating this product for. And we hit, the hurricane hit Puerto Rico. We didn't have as much money we had enough money like to move, let's say, people to the US if we wanted to, but not enough money to test the next assumptions we had to test, and get to a level where they were paying us for that. They were already paying us for a pilot, but not sustainable. It wasn't enough to sustain the business. And at this point, we could have, said, okay, we're going to keep going. But we decided to shift things down, because really at this point, when part of your team is on an island where some people are dying, some people are like their houses are gone, and there's no running water, there's no electricity, no Wi-Fi. They're thinking about what they're going to eat every day. It's survival mode. It really makes you think, what do I want to be spending my time building, right? Like we were at the core of it, we were building a chat bot and voice technology that helped, big companies train, very trained people. And the real question is that what we wanted to spend the next 5 to 10 years building? And when we thought about it, we kind of like took a step back and we said, you know what, like we're taking a break, and this is not, something doesn't feel right. Even though we could have probably built a business out of it. So it's a deeper, I think really deeply thinking about what you want to build, before you hit those points, are very, very valuable.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that and brought that up, because I think that is a question that definitely comes up along everybody's journeys, is those turning points. Okay, no go, and what are my reasons for continuing or stopping, or like, what do I really want out of this? And that's a personal decision that nobody else can really make for you, and
that's right.
You have to kind of feel into it. So it's a challenge for sure. Great. So I think we're about half an hour or so, but I do want to ask, kind of before we wrap up,
sure,
about the trends that you see in the impact space and impact innovation, since that's your slice. Where do you see things going? What do you think people in our community should be thinking about or keeping their eyes open for as impact entrepreneurs?
Yes. So I would say I'd put it into, I would say there's 2 takeaways that for impact entrepreneurs that are in the space to think about. One is really a case for being on the edge of what's going on. I spend a number of time not necessarily researching in the impact innovation space, because what I find is, let's say with blockchain technology, some of what the latest is going on is actually in a space that's not particularly just focused on impact. Like you can be there, you can see something that's happening, and as a person focused on impact, you can take a solution there and port it over to the impact space. So what I would say is, in general, there's more energy, dollars, and the for-profit space is usually on the edge, whether you want to admit that or not. Part of that is because the nonprofit space is a small segment of the global economy, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about it's, I think around 3 to 4%. Government is in the 20%, and the remainder is for-profit. So you think of in terms of dollars, you're by not focusing on for-profit, you're ignoring that a majority of the dollars and the energy, interest, and economy, you're ignoring a majority of the innovation that's taking place. So that's what I would say is, if you're looking for ideas for products, services, business models, to look in the for-profit space. And I think that is a trend that's more of a tip than a trend. One trend that I see that has been happening and will continue is the focus on, they say, sustainable revenue, even for nonprofits. That goes back to, my first point, saying that like for-profit organizations are majority of the global economy. And it's important that people want to see that if they put money into whether it's a nonprofit or not, that's going to grow the organization, and that impact is going to be sustainable. It's not going to be a one-shot time. Yes, granted, there are points of which that you need, you're hosting one event at one period of time, and that can work. But that's what I would say is really think deeply about how you can become how could you be a for-profit business that has a social mission? I would challenge every entrepreneur to think that way. So the reason I say that is because you look at a company like Tesla, right? And you see the billions of dollars that have gone into creating a sustainable, accelerating our transition to a sustainable energy system. That wouldn't happen if it wasn't a for-profit. Like, it just wouldn't, right? So over the period of time in which, he started, Elon Musk started till now, and no one thinks of it as a social enterprise. And I think that's the point, is we have to think of doing good things as doing good business. And there needs to be more entrepreneurs in that space. And, if people just focused on nonprofits, what they're going to wrestle with is that there is more capital, money, and you can go a lot further faster with on a for-profit structure. So that would be my challenge, is that even if you have a nonprofit, there's going to be more investment dollars that are moving into the philanthropic space, but even they're looking for a sustainable revenue source. So you have to, think about how you're making money. Think of it as a business. It is not, I think people put it into an evil category. It doesn't have to be. And that's, I guess, being between these worlds of like for-profit and the nonprofit space. That's probably one of the big things I see, is like people with a big heart that totally scoff off, the for-profit model and for-profit like processes and ways of thinking, when you can really steal them to make a big impact in the nonprofit space, and you're ignoring like the biggest asset you have in front of your eyes.
Yeah. And to think big too. I think like Tesla is a good example of, not all of us are going to be Elon Musk, of course, but the fact that, he's changing whole systems and industries, and that, like, to your point, that wouldn't happen if he wasn't thinking big and thinking sustainably. And that's kind of a unique case, but I think all of us can maybe challenge ourselves to think about that profitability piece, and how can we be bigger than maybe we initially assume we can be. I think so. There's some limitations that maybe we need to bust off as impact entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, and I put the line in the sand in nonprofit and for profit, because I'll use I'm gonna use Teach for America. Great organization. They're developing leaders very, and putting them into the education space. Their revenue now, you're talking about their 25, almost 30 years old now, and their reoccurring revenue, because they're charging to place teachers in schools. They are charging, and they're still with donations, at around, like, I think it's somewhere in the I believe it's a couple $100 million. I want to say, like, between 3 and 5. I forget the exact number, but you're talking about, that's over almost a 30-year period where you have, a Tesla, which makes, a couple billion, right? Multiples of that in a fraction of the time, right? That Teach for America has existed. You can go either way, right? But one's going to take a lot longer, just because that industry moves slower and it's a smaller slice of the global economy, where one, if you can figure it out, it does two things. One, it makes it more sustainable, but this is something that someone from google.org said. They said, if we can make it profitable, we have the responsibility to make it a for-profit, because we invite others to compete with us to solve a social problem. And I think that is something that's a deep thing that other entrepreneurs think about. That you can invite other people. If you discover how to make money doing it, you can invite other people to solve the problem that you're passionate about solving. You can make a movement, and that is what we need to do.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's the perfect place to wrap up, because I think that's
Thank you, Daniel.
a great summary of the kind of the philosophy. So, but before we wrap up, where can people find you? Because we didn't actually get into Rebel Method, but people can find that on iTunes and
you can go to rebelmethod.com. You can find us there and learn a little bit more about for all the rebels out there that want to start their ventures. That's where I'll be.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much, Sergio. It was great to see you again.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me.
We'll talk soon.
Definitely. Take care.